So it's often really easy to think that our tracks aren't good enough because we don't have the right equipment or we don't have a fancy studio, but Chime proves that those things just aren't necessary. This iconic track made with minimal gear is a masterclass in music production simplicity. So if you've ever felt bogged down by complex equipment or struggled to finish a track, looking at this is the key to solving those problems. Let's unlock the secrets of creating great music with what you already have and break free from technical overwhelm. Okay, so how is it possible without spending a lot of time or creating a complex synth patch or FX chain to create a unique sound to use in your tracks? So this initial sound is simply a tiny snippet of an easy listening record which Paul sampled and then sequenced out into this lovely rhythm sequence. So I tried really hard to recreate this from scratch. I always love it if I can go right back to the source and use the same equipment or a software version of what the original producers used. And it was a real struggle. I went through quite a few different versions. So there's a string sound in the extended version, and that is listed on who sampled, so I recorded a bit from there. So cool that he used that for this track. I thought, well, there's a chance maybe he used the same record to make the other bits, but I'm pretty sure that's not the case. Here are some examples. I put this bit that I sampled in, and then I just looked for different parts that I could maybe use. So it's pretty cool. So although this isn't the right sample, this is the process he would have done. Although it's much easier for me to do it in Ableton because he was using an Akai S700, which had a tiny sample time. So he would have had to listen through to the track and sample a little bit. I can whack the whole thing in the simpler and choose a little bit. But just by doing this, you can see how many interesting things you can get by using samples in this way. And it's really not difficult. I got the chords from Ski Oakenfull's breakdown of this track. Big up to him, did that years ago. So I looked at the chord he made and I basically used the same chord function. The closest I did get was using Omnisphere. I made this patch. Anyway, I can't feel too bad about not being able to replicate it, as Paul Hartnell can't either. So he said, I've bought that album twice in secondhand shops and I've listened to it so many times trying to hear where Chime came from, and I can't tell. It was literally random sampling and then homing in on a chord and going, that's nice. If he can't even find it with the record, I don't feel too bad that I can't recreate it. And how nice it really sounded became clear when he played it to someone else.
Sort of played it to Jazzy M in Ozone, who I used to go up and see. He kind of used to be a bit of a mentor for me. But I played him Chime. And he said, I'll have to listen to it on the headphones. And he put his headphones on, sat there, looking at me. He started smiling. I kept smiling, started smiling even more. I thought, Jesus, what's going on here? And he sort of took the headphones off and went, "Fucking hell, I've got to play this out loud." And then sort of turned the record off and played it out loud. And I swear to you, nearly every one of those DJs that was lined up all went, oh yeah, put their hand up before it even really hit the main riff. And it's like, unbelievable. I'd never seen anything, like that. Just going from bedroom to all of a sudden, these 3 rows of professional DJs all putting their hands in the air to want to buy this record. And he said, well, you can't buy it, but you will be able to in a couple of weeks, come back. And he was like jumping up and down. And
so I love that clip. There's so much excitement, so much joy coming from it. And this is something that we can all try. It's easy, doesn't need a lot of knowledge or technical know-how. Just find a tune, put it in a sampler and play about with the start time, looking for a nice bit to use. So quite often when people think about sampling, they don't think about using samples in this way. They think about taking huge chunks or loops. But sampling like this is a lovely way of getting unique textures. So there's another absolute production weapon we can take from this track. This is an example of something called a pedal point, which is something I really love. And all it means is that there's a sound that stays the same pitch throughout the whole track, while other parts change. I think the best way to understand that is just to hear it. So just notice when we listen to Chime how this sound is nearly throughout the whole track, and it just doesn't change pitch. All the other things happen around the context of that sound. Like the bedrock is the foundation, and without it, it loses so much. See what I mean? It's just massive. So a great example of this from a tune that I absolutely love is actually from the Velvet Underground, Venus in Furs, and in this track it's the viola or violin that just drones throughout. It's a really powerful technique. It's really not that difficult to use. Just put in something with one note and play around with it. So the bass line and the main melody reveal another absolute gem of production advice, which is such a simple and easy things to do. It makes tracks 10 times easier to finish and 10 times less boring. But before we look at that, let's quickly look at the drums. So in an interview, Paul mentions a classic acid track which had a major influence on Orbital in general, but I think it influenced their drums in particular. So let's look at the drums Orbital did in Chime and then compare them. Here we have a classic combo of 808 and 909 and the kick from a Simmons drum brain. So this is the kick I recreated. Quite clicky and high pitched. The 808 is just hats. And the 909 is just ride cymbals at this point. And then the classic kind of offbeat snare comes in here. So Orbital quite often have these kind of drums which are quite interesting. They're not straight 4 on the floor. The normal place to always put the snare would be on the 2 and the 4. So let's just listen to what that sounds like. Now, in general, there's nothing wrong with putting a snare on the 2 and the 4. I do it all the time, but it really sounds rubbish, doesn't it, compared to... I guess we're really used to the sound of it, but... Also, this snare is really loud. Like, you could say too loud. So yeah, drums don't do a lot. We get a little rim shot coming in here. But you notice there isn't like a big banging huge kick drum or anything. So the track that Paul references in one of the interviews is this one, Future Slam. Let's have a quick listen. So I think you can really hear the influence this had on Orbital in general, particularly the drums, which have quite a lot of high frequencies going on. There isn't a super heavy pounding kick drum. So I think it's vital to always remember that music is never made in a vacuum, and Orbital had their own influences. So now let's go to the heart of this tune and understand a super easy way of adding life to our tracks. So we can find it in the lead melody and the bass. The lead melody's sound is another sample, I think from the same record, and the bass was made using the Yamaha DX100 with a classic solid bass preset. So I'm using the Chipsynth OPS7, which does an amazing job of recreating the DX7, which isn't a DX100, but I think they're very similar. So solid bass gives this track such a solid foundation, and then the second sample just sounds amazing on top of it. The melody of the bass follows the melody of the lead sound. So when making this tune, Paul did a simple but powerful thing to keep the listener's interest throughout the track. Instead of having one melody throughout the track, he made an amazing melody and then stripped it down to make a few different parts in different parts of the track. The iconic melody is basically this one. A lot of people would have that and they just put that in the tune throughout the tune, but it gets boring. So firstly, we've got this lovely version, which is just the first bit. And it just works so nicely in the intro. Just love this intro. Then we've got this version, which is almost the full one. It's just a really nice variation to have, which means that when we do hear the full thing, it's the first time we've heard it. It's kept our interest. I think there are a few slight variations with this as well. When I work with producers one-to-one, I quite often find that they neglect this step, and that's why they struggle to complete their tracks. It's such a powerful approach when you're arranging a track to have all these parts to play with. And if you don't have it, you run the risk of getting a really boring track. So if you find that you often get stuck making loops, then check out this workshop on how to finish your tracks, in which I demonstrate this approach and a lot more. Another thing in my workshop is how to add the finishing touches, which takes a track from like 90% to 100% done. So in this track we just have a few extra sounds. So first of all we have the acid riff. And then also we have one more sound, which is this kind of, this melody. And again, I think this is probably a sample, and it's not quite the same as on the record, but in the mix, I think it's not too bad. And I made that in Omnisphere again. Yeah, and I just used a choir, wanted something with that kind of texture. But this track was just the beginning of the journey for Orbital. So to see how they develop their sound and their approach, check out this video on Halcyon and On. Peace.